Congratulations, Joyce.
Happy birthday, man. Happy birthday. It's the big day.
Thank you. It is a big day. And it's actually funny. So it's just me and my younger one here, right? For the first time, right. Marina's in US, and Adina is in school. But Shane was kind of saying, hey, maybe you just skip it today or move it, right? Like, I got a little surprise for you. So we're going to try to make this quicker than usual. So our guest is going to suffer a little bit. And you 100%. Were the one that actually told me too, maybe we cancel, right? And, no rest for the restless. And I think our millions of viewers and listeners, expected every Wednesday to come out. Yeah. So we need to stick to this, man. We need to stick to this. But I do have a whiskey ready.
Ready, great. I got a little.
Yeah.
If we save one, if we help one person get through a Wednesday, then we've done our job. And if it's just us, that's fine. So
agreed. So this is me today. I'm 17. That I feel like it. I act like it. That's what everybody tells me.
And I try to bring me back to so we must have had a birthday. Did we have a birthday celebration for you last year?
I mean, this was during the, but I don't think it would have fell on a Wednesday, so I need to look. But I'm sure we had some sort of virtual drinks or something. I'm getting old and my memory is kind of suffering these days. So
awesome.
One quick funny thing, because every episode we mention Matthew Holt and DaMassa. 100%. I actually got a little happy birthday song from DaMassa. As a recording. He said, and I will make sure that Matthew Holt does it. So he actually recorded a happy birthday song, and it was fantastic. So kudos. We'll touch on it, and I'm sure they do it, because I want to touch on one thing that was kind of crazy, like 130 million Huma. So Dan Vahdat, who been tracking from the old Medible. I will hopefully finally understand soon what they actually do. So maybe we should have Dan on this in a couple of weeks or whatever, but that was like I saw the big announcement today. So
I mean, how are you finding the news in general? I just find it a little bit almost mind-blowing before, in terms of like unpacking all the movements and what's going on in the space. And
it's a perfect segue to our guest, dude. So let's let him in. Let's let Jonah Comstock in. So hold on. Where is he? He's coming on.
I feel like I've hung out with Jonah before. I was looking at, hey Jonah.
What's up?
How's it going?
Jonah, good to see you. And I love how I scare off all of our guests saying, please be on time. And they literally right on the dot. So, and then, we'd rather hang them.
You guys are late.
We're talking this is professional media here. So Jonah, just so we set expectations at the right level here, there is nothing produced about this. So this is meticulously unproduced, as you've never seen.
I'm into it. I'm jealous of it, really.
Before we, you should be jealous of it. Yeah, I know. We'll get to that too. But before we get into, because it was a perfect segue, right? Like I don't know if you've watched any of the episodes before, but we kind of shoot the shit for a minute or two, and then I don't know why, but for some reason Matthew Holt and Jess gets mentioned every time with their little, health 2 and 2 but Jim was asking about how do I keep track of all this crazy ass news, right, in digital health. And I said, well, it's a perfect segue. So maybe before we go into that, give our millions of listeners and viewers a little bit about who you are, Jonah, and then we dive in.
Sure. Yeah, so we're live. We already jumped right into it. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, why not?
So I'm Jonah Comstock. I'm my official title is Editor-in-Chief and Director of Content Development at HIMSS Media, which is a long way of saying that I'm kind of the top editorial guy there. And HIMSS Media, if you don't know it by that name, you might know it by our brand names, Healthcare IT News, Moby Health News, and Healthcare Finance News. And Moby Health News is the one that's sort of near and dear to my heart, although of course I love all my children equally. But that's how I came into the game. I was employee number, I guess, one, if you don't count the founders at Moby Health News, when Brian Dolan started it. I joined in about 2012 and came into the HIMSS family through acquisition in 2015. So I kind of I started out as a reporter in this space when it was at its very kind of early
infancy,
yeah. Now I'm an editor in this space when it's at its second super exciting time, which I think, this sort of current period of the telehealth, the post-COVID telehealth boom is a pretty big time. And of course the funding right now is insane and everything like that.
So. Yeah, we just mentioned Huma, and I was kind of somewhat joking around, but somewhat not. Like maybe I can finally figure out what they actually do. But 130 mil, 100, I think equity, 30, freaking debt or something. But I think back to maybe Jim's question, right? Like I'm following, so I don't know, Jim, maybe repeat it actually, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, just like every week when I come on, so we've been doing this podcast now for a year, and every week, and at first it was like, the space has always been hot, like the digital health tech space has been hot for a while. So it's not, there's always good, rich data, but it's just like, oh, did you hear the 100 million? Well, we feel like we can't even like get through the 2 or 3 big pieces of news. So as a professional, how the hell do you unpack the space right now? Or is it just?
Yeah, I mean, listen, unpopular opinion, funding is not the be all and end all of news making. And funding is an indicator, it's a symptom that says, right. That people are interested in the space, that, people who are smart are making big bets on the space. And, probably not all of them are smart, but most of them I know are.
Some aren't, but
there's always a lot of work being done outside of that limelight of funding. There are companies that are quietly bootstrapping themselves. There are companies that are, coming in and getting the pilots and the partnerships and maybe not the $100 million funding round. So, we try really hard to look at the big picture, and over the years, as the funding has become more and more of prominent, we've relegated more of it to these funding roundups so that we don't have to, use the kind of mind share of entire stories on funding stories unless they're really big. And even our funding stories are templated now. So we minimize the effort we have to put in, and we just give people the information they want. What does it do? What's it going to use the money for? Who are their competitors? That kind of thing. So those are all kind of the steps we've taken to sort of try to put funding in its place as an indicator of things about the space, but not necessarily. I think some people give it a little too much credit, and that's to the detriment of, folks that are, working hard with their own money and actually earning money and being profitable. Sometimes those companies don't get as much coverage.
Even like Jonah, even taking that, and perhaps I jumped into it because it just like it's like kind of clickbaity. You see it and you kind of react to it. But is just even putting that aside, you're just saying like all the broad, amazing digital health tech news that's out there that, some of it might be, hey, like a manifestation of a company with, investors coming into it, but there's just going on, even if I just took this, because I was listening to one of your things, I was just listening to, like what Oscar Health is up to and the data. And I'm like, it's almost like everything I see, oh, that's exciting. That's interesting. I should dig into that. That's exciting. That's interesting. I should dig into that. And I'm like, even stepping back, that's overwhelming. And I'm kind of on the inside, or I feel like I am.
So we have some particular questions we try to ask, like, what's this company doing that's different than companies that already exist or other people have done before? Or what, how much hard data does this company have publicly available about how well their offering works? Questions like that kind of try to keep us grounded in like avoiding, just becoming megaphones for the hype machine. And I think, we're very rooted in that. That was a big thing, that Brian taught me and I taught the people I hired. And so we really try to make sure we're cheerleaders for the space because it's an exciting space and we believe in it, but we're not cheerleaders in so much as we don't, we want to really make sure we're doing reality checks and gut checks and writing about stuff that's really important and really meaningful and matters. So we don't want to get sucked into the Theranos of the world if we get away.
So, for me, and I, still echo, I still go to Moby Health News or follow them on Twitter. I mean, I don't go to a website. I do explicitly go to Exits and Outcomes. I mean, I love what Brian is doing. I do listen to the Health 2 and 2 with, Jess and Matthew riffing. And I think the three, and then of course there's many discussions going on. The three do help me boil those things down, right? Into a little bit of the noise versus, the real sounds coming through, right? But I think also, Jim, to your comment earlier, we're in the space and sort of like what's really happening. But I don't think anybody, outside of our bubble, right, goes to mobile health news. And I don't mean our little bubble, but like the larger digital health bubble, right? Or do you think, Jonah, you're now attracting, I think Brian actually laughs about this, like if we all had a penny that says, digital needs to go away and it's just health in a digital world, right? Which I'm guilty of as well. But do you feel that you're getting the readership now, at least for mobile health news, growing outside of the bubble, like, a little more mass of readers are coming? Or do you think still the circle has been expanding, but it's still within? You see where I'm going with this? I don't even know what I was going to ask.
There's two ways that will answer the question. One is, yes, we are growing. Our numbers are going up, month to month, especially. We had multiple record-breaking traffic months during last year and this year.
C19.
Yeah, now I'm scared to say it, but yeah, related to COVID. But honestly, when we have a story that brings out a ton of mainstream attention, it's a mixed blessing for us because we are a B2B publication, and frankly, that mass traffic is not particularly valuable to our advertisers. They actually want to reach the niche audience of digital health. So we want to, there's a lot of room to grow while still reaching, the people that we want to reach. But we could, we've never tried to be a D2C publication. We've always been a B2B publication. And that goes for all three of the publications. But the other thing is, so just for example, we ended up on the front page of Reddit last month. A story that somebody in our EU office had written about a tech for cluster headaches. Ended up on the front of our tech, and then it ended up on the front page of Reddit. And I'm a Redditor, so like that was very exciting to me. My twin brother, who doesn't really follow my work, called me and told me he saw it there. And that got a ton of traffic in. But again, like that's not exactly, like we get those from time to time. In Healthcare IT News, when we wrote about the Biden appointee, who is the first trans woman in Senate confirmed. We wrote about her, and that got a ton of outside traffic from like not our normal readers. And there were people who were coming over from the LGBTQ publications. And like, that's great, because some of those people will be the people we actually want, and they'll tell their friends, and it helps get our name out there. But that's not our main goal. We want to plug away for the faithful few. We want to be, the resource for the digital health space or the health tech space or the health finance space, whatever it is. But we're aware that we're, not going to be Wired or the New York Times or anything. We're fine with that.
So you go ahead, Jim.
No, what I was going to jump into, I don't know where you're going, Eugene, but like just this.
I don't know either, by the way.
We never know. That the signal to noise thing that you were just talking about, or we were just talking about, is so what like right now, like I'm fascinated. Like what are the signals that you're picking up right now and looking across all these media platforms that you're seeing in digital health that maybe we're not seeing?
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what you guys are seeing. I'm probably not going to say anything you guys don't already know, but I do think at this point in my job, I don't do much, reporting. I don't get to write very many articles. And so I'm spending I do the podcast, which is a big thing for me.
We'll talk about that, fellow podcaster. That's right. Yeah.
But what I really try to do in terms of keeping up with the space is to try to keep my eyes on what the big trends are, right? And sometimes that's like, what's the digital health angle on the big health news story that everybody's writing? So like, we're very interested in vaccines, tech in the supply chain, tech in, vaccine credentialing, stuff like that. But the more interesting stuff is like, what are the big trends that kind of define our space? So the one I've been thinking about a lot lately and doing interviews about, and we actually have a new HIMSS TV show dedicated to this topic that's going to be coming out very soon if it hasn't already, is this idea that like the last wave was telehealth. The last, telehealth is here. Everyone knows what it is now. It's done. But telehealth is a pretty rudimentary form of virtualizing care. It's basically taking an in-person visit and, moving it into a Zoom room. So we're starting to use this term virtual care, and I don't know if it's the best term, but that's what's, emerging to refer to sort of like what does a holistic virtual care experience look like? It's not just a video visit. It's asynchronous communication with your physician. It's, connected devices that are directly tracking you and algorithms that are picking out important information and sending it to your doctor. Like we're kind of moving into the next step of what really like next generation connected health looks like. And it's not like these things haven't been like talked about or put in books or papers, for the last 10 years, but like, we're really starting to see them emerge as viable, business models and viable models of care. And so I think that's I think that's the big trend right now. And I think that is honestly what's driving this huge boom in funding, is this feeling that, we've now conquered telehealth as table stakes. And obviously there's a caveat to that because there's a lot of telehealth that's not being done. But, now we're like, what is this next paradigm? The door's wide open for it.
Right.
And Jay Parkinson likes to say the Apple of healthcare is already operating. We just don't know who they are yet. He thinks it's crossover. But I mean, the general idea is,
actually, I don't know. He just left, so so I don't know if or if he's building his next thing. We'll find out. We'll have Jay on too.
I think he's just walking around with his dog. You should have him on. He's always a great interview. But he's great. He's going to be starting his next thing before you know it.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry. Please. I interrupted you last. You go ahead.
Yeah, I will. No, the interesting part is you said like, kind of what's the next generation of virtual care. I agree. I think things are already happening, right? I mean, we've seen consolidation, right? And if you think about, telehealth as a pipe, right, to what you kind of said, as a rudimentary, we've seen the acquisitions on quote unquote content, right? And of course, everybody knows the Televango one, right? But there's many other conversations happening and many other deals being done to fill that, right? And so I'm actually kind of curious, okay, well, that's common sense. Then what the hell is behind it even further, right? So that's where like my head is a little bit, aside from health coaching and adherence, beautiful technology. So Jim.
But those are going to be important parts, right? Because that's what's so beautiful about this is all the pieces we've been writing about for these years are going to be put together. And this is going to be, a whole care package that includes a virtual pharmacy and then adherence tools to make sure you actually take those drugs, and health coaching tools, and your what do you call it, CGM, and your virtual or artificial pancreas. And I mean, it's like we've spent years building 1 million point solutions for 1 million health conditions, and now it seems like we're just finally starting to ask the question of like, how can you integrate this into a holistic health system? So that's what's exciting.
1 for 1 million for 1 million. I love it.
So Jonah, and now I'm remembering, because my old man memory was just kicking in. Speaking of old man, so we're actually celebrating. This is the birthday episode for Eugene here today. So
you get to celebrate it with us.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And this is why we're gonna try to sort of finish in the 45-minute mark. I'll be pretty adamant today versus letting it go a bit longer.
But actually, Jonah, so you interviewed me, and you probably did 1,000 interviews that day at the Boston conference. I think was it right? It was
Connected Health Conference.
Yeah, the Connected Health Conference. And I was trying to, like I saw you, I'm like, I know this guy. And wait, hang on a second. We spent a few minutes together going back. But anyway, so I'm just connecting that as we're talking here. but coming back to, so one of the things I saw you comment on was the studies that were talking about that sometimes telehealth wasn't effective, or there was evidence about it not being effective. And I kind of, when I kind of heard that, or people commenting on that, obviously it's good to be studying all these things in different ways. But as I was also thinking about like no matter when you have change, there's always going to be someone trying to put a case together to say, hey, you shouldn't do this obvious thing that you like, it's not that telehealth is perfect, but it's kind of an obvious tool that should be in your kind of armory of tools if you're trying to deliver healthcare. But I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. So years ago, the argument against telehealth was an argument I always thought it's a thoroughly stupid argument. I think I wrote an op-ed about how stupid I thought it was, but it was about utilization. It was saying, telehealth doesn't save money because it increases utilization. And even though care is cheaper, people use more of it. And my argument against that argument was always, well, it sounds like people weren't going to the doctor enough before because it was too big a pain in the ass, and now they are. Like,
right.
Utilization, I guess I reject the idea that people are going to go to the doctor for fun because it's so easy. Mm-hmm. People are going to go to the doctor as much as they need to. And if they're suddenly doing it a lot more because you just made it easier to do, then we probably had a problem before where people weren't going to the doctor when they should.
Right.
So that's just a little soapbox. But I think more generally, like, there are objections to telehealth that have some weight, but usually they boil down to this was poorly designed and not actualized well. And so it wasn't a good user experience, and people didn't enjoy it. People didn't adhere to it. They didn't come in. We always look into those studies or people who are saying, telehealth doesn't work here, or telehealth isn't returning the results. And, we try to be very open-minded about it, but I think it usually comes down to an execution problem.
Right.
But also there's going to be as we move forward, and I should say this because I didn't say this when I said what I said before about virtual care, we're never going to reach a point where there is no need for an in-person visit, right?
Agreed.
There always are going to be use cases where you just need to see your doctor face to face, and hopefully when COVID is over enough that we actually will be able to see our doctor face to face when we need to. But it's all about limiting that to when it's necessary. So maybe some of these studies are going to come out and say, we found it. The use case that telehealth doesn't work for, and that's great. We found it. Let's make it.
Look, the combination of reimbursements for remote monitoring, telehealth, I'll say the new novel providers like Livongo, Amada, et cetera. I think, I love your comment again, the 1 million for 1 million, right? But I think it is being pulled together. And, if we look at we should actually also have Marco on from Ping On. But 300 plus million people on that telehealth platform, and they've thrown in a shitload of content, right, in there. And I don't mean educational, right, meaning just all of that. So I think we're there, and that's why it's a little bit of like what I wanted to before, Jim, when you again interrupted me, but no, I'm just kidding. You started off, Jonah, with the first phase and now the second phase of digital health. How do you sort of define the two, and what are the major differences, right? Which, I think I know the answers, but I'm curious.
Well, there are probably way more than two, honestly. I've come up with this particular schema. But I think it is about I was talking to Jay. I had just a couple of really great conversations with Jay recently, and they're on my top of mind right now. One of the things he said,
Jay Parkinson, you're still talking about, right?
Jay Parkinson,
okay.
Right.
Yep.
He founded Sherpa, and
Yep.
he gets a lot that he's 5 years too early for things, and then he invents them but doesn't make any money off of them. And so we were talking about that, and he was talking about how when he started Sherpa, they were trying to create their infrastructure for ordering lab tests, and every time they went to Quest or I can't remember who the other big one is.
LabCorp.
Yeah, or LabCorp. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
They basically said, we have zero infrastructure for operating on anything other than a state or local level. So when they were building out their anywhere telehealth platform, they had to build out 50 different infrastructures for ordering lab tests, even though these are national companies that are operating in all 50 states. Right. And so there's so much of that. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, in the early days of digital health, nothing was done for you. You had to do everything yourself. Yeah, and that meant a lot of things got done 20 different times, And that's why we had such a hard time and have had such a hard time with data standards and interoperability, because everybody was innovating in silos and building products, and it was bad for the products and it was bad for the ecosystem. And I think it's not really so much a matter of phases as I gradually the middleman operating layers have emerged to sort of smooth that over. Standards have emerged to smooth that over. And the other thing that's really interesting is that the talent pipeline has emerged. So it used to be, if you were hiring for a digital health company, you basically said, oh, I guess I want someone with either tech background or healthcare background, and I'll teach them the other half, and hopefully they'll pick it up. But now there's so many
digital health talent, right?
Yeah, the talent's there. Even in journalism, we're finding we can actually hire digital health reporters. I mean, there's still probably a Rolodex I can count on a couple of hands, but we're all stealing people from each other all the time.
The reusable components, there was a whole Twitter discussion with our friends Chris Hogg and Joe Connolly and many others sort of chimed in. And, I think the point here is like, you can literally stitch together a health service using the parts that, to your point, Jonah, never existed before 10 years ago, right?
The other piece of it is just like the cultural piece, right? And that awareness and acceptance. Because, the other thing that those companies that were too early to the game had to deal with was they had to teach every prospective customer, much less patient, what this whole digital health thing is and how it works and what are the advantages. And that shared vocabulary has become more and more available. And that makes, that allows you to focus on the particulars of your solution rather than having to educate constantly.
I think, I love to pull on something you were saying before. I thought it was really profound, talking about, when you study these, like we had people on here from Medable. Like, who did we have on from Medable?
Michelle Longmire.
Michelle from Medable. And she was talking about like the robustness of studies that can be done to evaluate the effectiveness of digital health technologies, right? Like, so they can actually, the studies can be quite robust, but maybe they need to be different types of studies. But I think what you talked about is that these things fail on the design, and they fail on the integration or fail on the execution. And that's my big, I don't know, Eugene, how you feel that that's the biggest thing I worry about when I go to implement a product. They want to do a pilot, everyone wants to do a pilot, I go to implement a project and they want to study it right away, and then they impinge your execution or impinge your design or make you do something or send CSV files over instead of integrating it, all these things, and that just makes it shitty for people to run in the program. So
you mean bubble gum and tape?
Mm-hmm.
You mean bubble gum and tape? Yeah,
bubble gum and tape. But actually, what it's almost like it's like. But the way you're studying that is so like I can out design the effect, right? Like, just can't do it in other spaces there. I'm not sure where I'm going with it, but
that's the other problem with when you had to hire health people and tech people and tell them to talk to each other is that we discovered, and there were a million think pieces written about this, that there were some very sharp cultural differences between those two worlds. One of them was the whole tech fails fast and medicine doesn't fail, because if it does, somebody dies. So, how do we take a tech, iteration framework and make it work in medicine? And another one was like, the tech world, people were used to dealing with a user, and they made the assumption that a user was the same thing as a patient. And it's not, as much as we like to talk about the consumerization of healthcare, a patient is a person who, especially if you're interacting with someone who's interacting with the healthcare system, and you're not like a direct to home service, but like a patient is a person who's in a very specific circumstance that often is very emotional, and that your user experience design is important in a different way and different. So there's just been so many, I guess, meta lessons to learn in order to actually learn the really helpful specific lessons about what works. It's been a process. I think we've all watched it, and in retrospect we say, oh, that was so obvious. But
there's so much to unpack, and I'm like looking. there's about, I'm time boxing us today, so 10-15 minutes, right? And then my younger one has some kind of a surprise for me, so I'm gonna need to go. But there's two topics that I wanted to cover, Jim. So one, you're a fellow podcaster, Jonah, and I'm actually curious on your view on reading, right, and editing versus talking, and which I prefer, by the way, the latter. I don't like the writing part. But I'm curious, like, where and how you looking at the podcasting, especially for health, as a medium. That's one.
Yeah. So I started this podcast about a year and a half ago, November 19.
Okay.
There had been many attempts at HIMSS to start podcasts, but they didn't work because people didn't grasp all of the essential things about what a podcast is. We all know the best practices of, like, you upload every week at the same time so people know what to expect, and you make sure it's on all the platforms so people can access it easily. But what really inspired me to do it was listening to the 538 podcast, and that's kind of how I get a lot of my politics news, or how I did at the time. And what I loved about it was I also read their website. And so I was able to see how they used the podcast versus how they used their articles. And there were a couple of things they did. One was, if they had a reporter who wrote a big enterprise piece, they'd do an episode of the podcast where another editor interviewed them. And it was like promo for the piece, and also a chance to dive a little deeper, maybe get into the things they didn't have room for in the piece. The other thing was just like having editors come together and, do a big talk about all the stuff that's in the news right now, which I think is a nice way to add additional trend and context. And the other thing that does is, like, it lets people get to know your editors as people in a way that they don't just reading their reports. And then the third one was breaking news podcasts, where, like, something big happens. You might not have time to write the article, but you do have time to say, get in a room together, let's record the podcast and put it up right away. And, during election season, those were crazy. And so I really liked this for all of those reasons. I thought, this is a chance to build personal brands of me and my editors, and let our readers get to know these people the way I know them, not just as, bylines. But it's also, it's a tool in our toolbox. If something big happens and we want to respond to it, and we, want to take our time with the article because we want to be meticulous and get the quotes and call the people. But maybe the podcast goes up, and, that's what we did with, like, the Talladega show. We put the podcast up right away, and we had, I think we had Neil Patel on, if I remember right, and just, like, talk about, what happened? What does this mean? When Proteus went background, we had Brian on. That was one of our biggest shows in terms of downloads, and it actually won an ASPE award, which is a small business press award.
We're working on our awards, Jim, right?
So that's my feeling. Like, the podcast is, like, a really useful tool for a journalist to add a little bit of, like, personality and also this nimbleness. And that's what I kind of fell in love with it. And it's become a huge part of my job, mostly because I just sort of launched it without asking permission. And then sales eventually found out they could sell ads against it. So now they like it a lot. And now they're asking me to add more. So we may be adding additional podcasts soon.
I wonder also, like what's come to the front here, like, what probably for both you guys is this idea of, like, comfort. Like, remember, like, the when you would pick up the magazine and you would see the editor and you might recognize their face in the corner or the back of the Financial Times. There was the woman that always, did the back of that supplement in the Financial Times. I remember her, like, Lucy something was her name. And it just kind of, like, it just put me into, like, a comfortable routine, reading the paper kind of there. And then now with podcasts, I find I'm doing the same thing, especially now in the environment that we're in, that I find comfort from, like, it's like company, it's like,
Absolutely.
I have a, and I'm more sensitive to what's going into my brain than I maybe was before, because there's so much, like, video and information streaming at me, kind of hacking into me, but they're just giving people company.
It's so funny. At the beginning of COVID, they said that COVID was going to kill podcasts because nobody was commuting anymore. But instead, I think it's rejuvenated podcasts because we're all so darn lonely that being able to pipe some familiar, friendly voices into our house is a big help.
Yeah. That's why Jim and I's show is so successful, right, Jim?
It's a good format. I wanted to say, I didn't really answer your question about podcasts and health, and I wanted to touch on that because I think we have seen a boom in this space, digital health even. And I think that makes sense to me because this has always been such a community, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, we all have met each other at events. We see each other on Twitter, you know, the work that Matt and Jess have done and other folks.
And I credit Dan Kendall, who got us going, and with the Health Podcast Network, and so creating that community of, I think, the health podcasters as well. Are you guys are HIMSS Media?
We're on Dan's network. Yeah, we joined
awesome.
Earlier this year. So
awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of connectors in this space. You know, come a long way from when I first started writing, and it was like Paul. What was his name? Paul Simone?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He was on LinkedIn.
Sonnier.
Yeah. He's still got a good group, but you know, there's just so much and I mean, Clubhouse, which I can't really get into, but
I'm over it. We keep talking about it. I'm over it.
We tried it for a while. We got into it for a while. Although I want to go back to the other thing. I have to go back to the DJing. That was epic when I did that. That we had one of our guests is a Sunday DJ show.
We should. I'm actually might be going to US, back to New Jersey, so we'll do it live from Ritesh Patel. He's great.
I had Matthew Zachary on a while back. He calls himself a DJ. He's a big patient advocate. He's you guys would have a lot of fun with him, as long as you don't have a swear filter on your show. He's a really.
We market safe for kids, but I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. So the big I don't know, not an elephant in the room, but I think one of the things that and I know Chrissy Farr had her awesome opinions on how do you pitch to journalists, right? And to me, this is personally, and I think this is where Chrissy was coming from, and I'm curious on your thoughts and the approach. So first of all, before I go into that, all of a sudden with this DTX podcast, and I think our fame, Jim, I gotten actually a few of these embargoes, would you agree to an embargo thing, right? So I had to actually learn what the hell that means, really. That's one. But back to this, it's not about pitching to me, right? At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and I loved your comment, the podcast you love because there's a person that it's sweat, blood, and tears, doing lots of research and etc. And just you don't just pitch to a VC, you build relationship with people, right? So I'll pause, but I do want some hints for our entrepreneurial listeners. What does it take? What's sort of some of the key thoughts, and it might be somewhat personal, but in general, I'll pause.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is that I read recently, and I guess this is actually I just Googled it. It's from 2018. There are now 6 PR people for every journalist in the United States. So what? The volume of pitches that we get is insane. And I consider myself a really nice person, and I always try to always interact with other people as people and as I would want to be treated. But a lot of emails I just don't respond to, and I can't even feel bad about it anymore because there's just too many. And sometimes when that happens, it's not personal, and it's not even that your pitch is bad. It's just that a journalist has a particular beat and a particular style of thing they're interested in, and it doesn't fit. But I do have some go-to tips that I give to get my attention. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning of the show about the questions that we're always asking about, that to kind of keep us reality checked on newsworthiness. And there are questions like, how is this different than what's out there now?
Right.
And there are also, questions about what hard evidence do you have for this efficacy? But also there's a place for human interest. If a lot of founders in healthcare have personal stories, so it's not you're alone in that, but the personal stories speak to people because a lot of people who read about this space also have personal connections to it. So I do encourage people to include the human interest pitch because I think it can be really compelling. But I'm also very driven by data and very driven by novelty and uniqueness. Those are kind of my 3 those are my 3 tips. And then the other thing is just like, and this is something they should teach you in PR school, but like, if I'm getting that many emails, you better have gotten my attention in the subject line. And if you didn't get my attention in the subject line, you definitely better have gotten my attention in the first paragraph. I have to read any further than that. I've probably already moved on to the next email in my email box.
Right.
So,
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna clip that part because I gotta tell my team. But so I think we want to we want to make sure we get Eugene to his birthday party celebration. And so I think Eugene, unless you add something else, we'll move right into the.
No, let's do it. Do it.
Relationships are still important. And I've been doing this job for more than 8 years. I have PR people that I've known almost that whole time, even though they've moved to many different, organizations. I'm more likely to spend a little more time reading their pitch, especially if they've like taken time to get to know me at an event.
Right.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Lovely. So if you're looking at, digital health tech, entrepreneurs right now, and you were thinking about, what would be the advice that you would give, emerging digital health tech entrepreneurs right now in terms of focusing on the market from everything you're seeing?
It's a really good question. I'm gonna take a second to figure out a good answer.
That the journalist in him has to process. I love it.
I guess one thing I would say is, I'll give 2 pieces of advice. One is, based on what we've been saying, if you can't figure out how your product or your service or your company fits into the larger ecosystem, if you can't figure out how it, how it plays nice with everything else that's going on, you're probably going to end up where a lot of founders have ended up with a, siloed product that just couldn't quite, gain enough attention share to make it on the market. So, think about your place in the ecosystem and what it is and what it could be. And the other thing is just do your homework. There are so many things that can get you, whether it's, you didn't get the right FDA clearance, or you didn't get you didn't think about reimbursement, or you didn't patent something right, or you didn't, you don't really have efficacy data, or your efficacy data has too small a sample size, or you don't know how to get, you don't have a plan for getting a pilot. I mean, just like so many things that you've got to get right. And, luckily a lot of people have trod that path before you, and there's now a lot of good info out there about how to do those things. There's webinars, there's events, there's books, there's articles, there's podcasts. So, just do your homework. This is not an easy space to innovate in. And I'm so excited that so many people choose to do it anyway, but don't let yourself get hung up on something you could have prevented.
Yeah, and there's lots of lessons already to the discussions that we've had. So no, agreed. And talk to people. I'm going to add to this, right? Talk to other entrepreneurs that has been through the block. So
so entrepreneurs love to help each other, even though they're all in competition with each other, which is really beautiful, I think.
100%.
That's absolutely.
They're kindred spirits.
So my daughter was already pinging like, you done yet? Jonah, thank you for making the time. To the millions of our listeners and viewers, just hit that subscribe button, continue this rise of the shot empire, and we go from there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonah. You're obviously a very nice guy, and this is our special birthday tribute to Eugene here. Thank you so much.
My podcast is HIMSS Cast. If your listeners want to come check it out, it's on Dan's network, and we'd love to have you.
I'm on HIMSS Cast app right after this. I'm going to listen to it on my bike ride home. So
all right,
awesome. I'm not going to listen to it tonight, but I have listened to some episodes. So cheers to that.
All right, thanks
guys.